Welcome everyone to this Business Edge podcast. My name is Phil Mattia. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Feliciano School of Business. Today is April the 3rd. It's a Friday, and we say that because things are changing by the day. So I want to make sure everyone knows this podcast is being taped on April 3rd. We are here with Dr. David Axelrod. He is a professor of economics at the Feliciano School of Business. So welcome, Dr. Axelrod. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing very well.
Great,
How are you?
great. Before we begin the interview, just to remind everyone, as you're listening to this podcast, Dr. Axelrod has done several other episodes on the Business Edge podcast, so feel free to listen to them because there's several interesting podcasts that are available. So as I mentioned, today is Friday, April 3rd. This morning, the March jobs report was just announced that we are at a 4.4% unemployment rate in the United States, 730,000 job losses in the month of March. Also, last week, 3.2 million Americans filed for unemployment, and this week it was about 6 million. So in total, about 10 million Americans apply for unemployment, and obviously things are changing by the minute here. So let us begin the podcast. What impact will the $2.2 trillion stimulus plan have on the United States economy?
Okay. Well, the stimulus plan, which is composed of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act and Families First Coronavirus Response Act, attempts to cushion the economic shock by increasing support for testing and care to attempt to reduce the number of people that will die from COVID-19, as well as providing incentives for businesses to keep their people employed, expand paid sick leave, increase unemployment benefit for those that lose jobs, and provide discretionary funds to the U.S. Treasury to support businesses and financial assets. To answer this question requires understanding how this economic crisis is different from those of the past. An important concept is what we call a binding constraint. This is a limited resource, law, morals, etc., that is the effective constraint that binds us from doing more. The Great Depression and Great Recession began as financial crises. The value of stocks collapsed as financial markets dealt with risky investments that went bad. With the reduction in wealth, consumers started to spend less, businesses reined in investment and laid off workers, which created a vicious cycle of further losses. What kept the Great Recession from becoming worse was an early intervention to maintain market liquidity as a stimulus plan that combined increased government spending with tax reductions. The Great Depression was so much worse because there was no substantial stimulus until FDR became president, and that the US and other countries went into protectionist mode, which means increasing tariffs, which discouraged international trade, which further slowed all economies. So the binding constraints were insufficient finances and indirect limits on trade. In those situations, providing people with jobs and more money would naturally lead markets to grow. Today, the economic collapse was not started by the loss of the value of stock and lack of liquidity. Rather, it starts with a health crisis, which can only be handled by having people interacting less. The binding constraint is not the financial. Rather, it is the requirements that many businesses either shut down, drastically reduce business operations, or change how they operate. This is why we are seeing record-smashing increases in unemployment compared to previous crises. It is also why the stock market fell as quickly as it did. It is behavioral limitations on spending finances as compared to the financial limitations on behavior. Look, sometimes when all you have is money, everything looks like a financial problem. So how does this impact the effect of the stimulus plan? That households will receive a check, the unemployed will have more benefits, and businesses will not lay off as many people, will make it easier for people to pay their rent, buy food, and pay bills, especially electric, phone, and internet service if we're going online, thus limiting how badly the economy could crater. However, in the near term, while social distancing rules are active, some of the positive impact will be diminished. While necessary for reducing the spread of the virus, it also reduces where and how people can spend. In the longer term, once those rules can be lifted, there can be more economic growth in response. Ultimately, the plan is successful if it helps us get through the crises, enables us to heal, and then return to growing our economy more wisely in the future. How long that healing and return to growth takes depends on how effective the plan is in preventing businesses, especially small businesses, from failing and then having to be reestablished.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference from 2008. What I hear a lot on the news is that this is a health crisis. The economy, for all intent and purposes, was doing well before the outbreak, and this what we're going through right now clearly is a result of the coronavirus and its impact on it. One of the things that kept coming up, and that's why I asked you the question. You're an economist, is this whole idea of giving $600 per week for those that are unemployed for over 4 months coming from the federal government. So you collect your unemployment insurance from the state, but then you also collect from the federal government, which is wonderful, in my opinion, to support the Americans that don't have jobs and are unable to support themselves and pay rent and pay for food and all that. But that, critics argue is this an incentive for those that are unemployed to not go find a job so they can sit home and collect from the government, from state and federal, but never want to go forward in finding something?
Good question. Well, look, whether this is a bug or a feature depends on what one's priorities are. Look, in normal times, giving extra benefits to not work would likely encourage some who are unemployed to not be as diligent. However, in normal times, it's also true that receiving benefits requires demonstrating one is actively looking for work. Also, the amount of benefit would be less based on what your income was. So typically, it's only for about 6 months. Some states, it's as short as 12 weeks. However, these are not normal times. Most work cannot be done at home or online. Looking for work typically requires interacting with people. This encourages behavior inconsistent with social distancing. So temporarily, if the benefits lead people not to work or look for employment, it also supports them to behave in a way that gets us through the crisis more safely. Look, there have been times when farmers were paid not to grow crops so as to maintain overall revenue in agriculture. That is not completely unlike what is happening now. A related point is that while incentives are important to influencing behavior, investment is often necessary before behavior becomes feasible. When people have no income, then they can become homeless, they don't have enough food or health care, their children get less education, they are more prone to illnesses of all sorts, they can become more desperate. These are not luxury consumer goods that make life more enjoyable. They are investments in human capital that enable a more productive life or even life at all. Getting through this crisis requires a different attitude, a different spirit towards work and finite resources. If you have 2 masks, you might be better off giving one to the person across from you than to keep both and letting more of the other's virus load get sent your way.
Yeah, and it's interesting with everything that's going on now. One of the things also that came up, and it's just from watching news, and I watch news, but I read a lot, is this whole idea of, is this because the word socialism has become mainstream now in the recent elections, and both in the House and the Senate back in 2018, and obviously the rhetoric that's going on now in the White House and in the Congress. So critics argue, is this a form of socialism or a form of universal basic income, which I believe a couple of the Democratic candidates had proposed. I think it was Andrew Yang mentioned it as
Yes.
well as others.
Mm-hmm.
So, those that are unfortunate, the stimulus plan passed unanimously in the Senate. And I'm not sure about the House. I think they did a voice vote. I'm not sure if it passed unanimously, but apparently it did. But still, there was some chatter from some of the congressmen or women who were not completely in favor of it, saying, "Well, this is a start of universal basic income or socialism." So, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. Well, first, look, I want to be careful to distinguish between the increased unemployment benefits and the stimulus checks. Okay, first, the one-off stimulus payments are going to all individuals that have work-eligible Social Security numbers that are not dependents, right? So they're not going to go to children. This is not yet a universal basic income, or we're going to call it a UBI. UBI would be a steady and predictable income independent of one's working status. So for example, Social Security is not a UBI because the benefit received depends on one's working income history, right? The more you make, the more Social Security you'll get. So it varies as an entitlement that has been earned, right? Similar to paying a higher insurance premium to receive larger coverage. With respect to changes in unemployment, there are two main elements in the plan. One is the provision to provide extended benefits for an extra 13 weeks, right? Typically going from 26 to 39 weeks. Another adds an additional $600 a week to the state unemployment benefits that you are entitled to, but that's only through July. Some people who are self-employed that have lost work may also receive a benefit. However, like all unemployment benefits, you need to have lost your job to receive them. If you quit your job, you are not entitled to them. To maintain benefits, you must also be actively looking for work. So it would not be the case that one could just quit their job and end up with more money. Again, this is not a UBI, as it is not permanent, and only the unemployed get it. However, if the health crisis did not abate and people needed to stay home longer, it is possible these benefits could be extended. While there is a potential disincentive for from market employment with a true UBI, I mean, that's not an unreasonable thing to be concerned about. The benefit to society of families being able to afford food, shelter, and health care is really quite substantial. So the critique of this being a form of socialism could as well be applied to help, corporations, right? With what they might receive. Okay, so if we're going to go criticism, socialism, we got to look at the whole thing. So it's useful to keep in mind that the theoretical benefits from free market capitalism assumes a stable society and an environment where small changes to behavior accrue to large economic growth over time. There is an underlying assumption that households are only affected on the margin in any moment. While it is true that in times of crisis, price spikes provide an incentive for greater supply, the nature of the crisis and how quickly it develops sometimes benefits from a more coordinated response. The last thing brings up the biggest challenges. Those who prefer and to tend to benefit from being competitive and focusing on their own interest may dislike some of these solutions. Those who prefer and to tend to benefit from being cooperative and considering the well-being of society as a whole will be more accepting of them. Clearly, we are critically dependent on the doctors, nurses, and others who are moved by helping others. It makes their job easier to help all of us if we have policies that express their concern more widely.
Yeah, you mentioned corporations, the funding or the stimulus that they've been receiving. That's another critics were arguing, and one I heard in particular was Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez from New York, was on the House floor making a point that a large majority of the stimulus went to huge corporations, big companies. I think it was about 80% of the stimulus went to, as opposed to the average American. So in your opinion, was more money given to large corporations? Should have more money have gone to, instead of the $600 per week, should have been $1,000 or $2,000 per week and less money to the corporations? Or do you think they balanced it out correctly?
Well, it'd probably be useful to have more money to go to individuals. I think it's worthwhile just to break down what it looks like, where the money is going to. So Forbes, if you go to their website, provides a nice visual breakdown of where the money goes. So about $600 billion goes to individuals, $500 billion would go to large corporations, about $380 would go to small businesses. There's another about $340 to state and local governments, and about another $180 billion to public services like hospitals. So based on that, it's about a quarter, which would be less than a majority, that goes directly to large corporations. Although depending on what the Federal Reserve does, there may be leveraging that could end up being more, but then that would be more of an indirect. So we should keep in mind that economists often talk about the circular flow of a market economy. Money that goes to households will eventually find its way to businesses. But the idea is that households get more of the goods and services they want and need. The ultimate purpose of economic activity is not making financial profits. It's about producing the life and lifestyles we aspire to. If the money goes to individuals, public services, state government, and such, the idea is that they are going to buy goods and services with it. So directly and indirectly, much of this will flow through to large corporations. That's true. This brings up another important issue. Economists often speak of the productivity of labor, capital, and other resources. One that has more recently been considered as a resource on its own is entrepreneurship. This is about running a profitable business that produces what people value. So we can ask the question, how much productivity are we getting from the profits that are generated? Traditional businesses will attempt to optimize what they produce so as to maximize profit. However, in a time of crisis, households and government might prefer to use the metric of value of production per dollar of profit. This still recognizes that for a business to sustain, it can't run at a loss. Yet, the existence of high profit margins does not indicate yet the fact that there are high profit margins does indicate a firm could produce more and still be profitable. So it can be argued that the problem is not large corporations receiving stimulus money. The problem would be if they do not produce substantially more with it.
Yeah, and speaking of stimulus money, last time we went through this was in 2009, about 10 or a little over 10 years ago. Different situation, obviously, with the fall of the mortgage crisis and the fall of '08 and the whole collapse of the market. It was obviously an economic issue, and the plan back in '09 was largely criticized because corporations, the money that was given to corporations, they used for either stock buybacks or executive compensation. In 2020 stimulus, there was a large effort put behind ensuring that this wouldn't happen again, where companies would use the money to shore up their companies and have it flow back to the workers and keep their workers on staff and on payroll. So do you feel this could happen again with the 2020 plan that was put in place?
Well, as the act is written, okay, it limits increases to high salary and highly compensated employees, okay? And so those are typically going to be the executives. It will be much more difficult for corporations to buy back stocks and enhance compensation in 2020. Of course, as with many laws, the capacity to properly enforce behavior depends on the resources used to do so. However, the overall benefits of the real economy are quite substantial and the risks of critical misuse low enough for it to be worthwhile.
Right. So, as I mentioned, it's April 3rd today, and sadly, the cases are going up in the United States. It's on the increase. From what we're hearing from experts is that we are, especially in New York, we're looking at late April for the apex, and also late April for the apex in the United States, and then you see that downward slope. And if we all maintain social distancing and wash our hands and stay home, the hope is this will contain itself, mitigate, contain, and then we hopefully can get back to our normal lives. But if it does continue, and if it's not contained, and it's now, let's play a hypothetical here. If it's June or July and we're not at the apex yet, do you think the government will implement another stimulus package?
The federal government will almost certainly provide more stimulus and other considerations for economic well-being if the health crisis takes longer to resolve. It seems almost certain there would be another wave of infections next fall or winter, but the expectation is the U.S. will be much better prepared to handle it. I would anticipate that plans for any future stimulus package will depend on how effective the current one is and what kind of regulations on travel, face-to-face meetings, education, entertainment events, and the like will be required. It is not unreasonable to consider how long the economy can be mostly shut down before the loss of production possibilities make other health issues like insufficient food, shelter, and medicine more significant than the virus. The first thing to do is get through the next couple of months with a socioeconomic system and condition which we can recover from. And part of that is the spirit with which we regard each other's well-being. So I think that needs to be reinforced. We have to be kinder to each other. We need to respect each other. That's just, we got to do it.
Well, the discussion I've been hearing is the next stimulus package. And what's amazing is it seems like the Republicans and Democrats agree on this, because Trump is saying, well, he wants an infrastructure package, a $2 trillion infrastructure package. Let's rebuild the highways, bridges, airports, train systems. Speaker Pelosi also agrees in an infrastructure package. Now, I'm not sure if they agree on the price tag and what it's going to be involved, but it seems like they both agree to it. Kevin McCarthy, who is the minority leader in the House, yes, minority leader, as well as some other Republicans are saying, well, let's see how this first stimulus package does before we start committing to another. The Congress is back in session, I believe, the third week of April after Passover and Easter break. They're coming back and they're going to take it up. But it seems that Secretary Mnuchin is having conversations with the Democratic leaders about doing this next stimulus package really focused on infrastructure. The benefit of that, obviously, is people get jobs and get back to work. Also, the president mentioned about some deduction where corporations can have their employees eat out at restaurants and they can take it as a deduction on the tax returns. So what are your thoughts on a stimulus package that includes some type of infrastructure?
Oh, I think infrastructure is going to be very important. First of all, we've needed infrastructure investment for a while, okay? We need it badly. Our bridges are a mess, for example. So it needs to be done. But if they're going to do that, and we're going to be even more reliant on the internet, okay, and remote communication, they're going to have to make a serious investment so that all households, whether you're wealthy or poor, can have very high-speed internet. So, yeah, an infrastructure package is kind of a no-brainer because we needed to do it anyhow.
Yeah, and that's what Speaker Pelosi mentioned, that broadband was important because sadly people don't have it in different parts of the country, to build up that infrastructure so they have access to high-speed internet, broadband, whatever you call it, as part of it. The sticking point is going to be, and I read this as well, is that the Speaker Pelosi mentioned that any type of infrastructure really we focused on preserving the environment, or the Green New Deal, as they call it. Republicans are not in favor of it, and I think that's where the argument's going to be. And if they in fact do go forward with some type of infrastructure, what limitations will it entail with respect to being environmentally conscious? So, but we'll see what happens with that.
Yep.
So let me ask you last questions. What proposals have you made through this shutdown?
Okay, well, thank you for asking that. Well, look, given the current administration is very pro-private sector solutions, what they can do is encourage and support people helping people directly through expanded charitable donations and then providing them the deductions. As we are starting to see, many of the federal solutions are going to take months to get money to people. Like, for example, this stimulus check, their current estimate now is it might take 20 weeks to get it all out.
Wow.
Which, that's not particularly helpful right now for a lot of people. So what can happen is that the wealthiest households and businesses could donate directly to poorer households immediately, and the federal government could provide refundable tax credits and not just tax deductions for these donations. So those without income would get help quickly, while those who can wait will get their donations back next year. So the proposal has several components. Okay, first, Individuals, households that donate goods and services directly to financially disadvantaged households receive a charitable tax credit for the current value of those donations. Second, businesses that continue to keep their workforce employed receive a charitable tax credit based on the employee's compensation, although that may be limited, for higher paid employees. And this would be in addition to the labor cost deductions for their taxes. Third, businesses will also receive a charitable tax credit for providing free or low-cost goods and services to the financially disadvantaged. And fourth, businesses that continue to provide goods and services, like rentals, for example, to their consumers and clients through a delayed payment plan would receive a subsidized interest per month during the time of the emergency. So this is similar to the idea of the Fed providing a negative interest rate. Getting through the health and economic crisis requires society working together with the intent of getting back to a strong enough economy so we can afford for individuals and businesses to go back and focus only on their self-interest.
Great. Well, very informative as always, David. I enjoyed the discussion. I think we'll be doing many of these as we go forward because it seems like it's going to be some time before we get this thing under control. So.
Oh, yeah.
But I appreciate it. Stay safe, and we'll be talking soon.
Be well. You stay safe, and thank you again for the opportunity.